97 Rock, but the very next song was Motley Crue, Home Sweet Home. And that was, we were pounding on the roof, and it was a riot. That was sort of that emotional moment that realized this was the right choice.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, whenever you may be listening, and welcome to Latitude, the 43 North podcast. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Kaleida Health, where every day they change lives and make miracles happen. Learn more at KaleidaHealth.org. How's everybody doing this week? Thanks for listening to the podcast. I'm Nate Benson, Digital Media Manager at 43 North, and of course, your illustrious host. I am quite illustrious, so I'm told. But that's here nor there. We've done this 25 times. Can you believe it? We're on the 25th episode. Next week will be the 26th. And I now know that I can count that high. Half year's worth of podcasts. That's pretty amazing. This week on the podcast, we have GapGrid CEO Bill Irvine. GapGrid is a fascinating Buffalo startup founded by ex-Synacor engineers. So where does Bill fit into this? Well, he's a Buffalo native and founder of multiple startups himself. And like so many people, Bill left Buffalo. So why did this expat come back? I'll let Bill tell his story. Bill, how are you today?
I'm doing great.
All right, so as we start out each podcast, give us the quick pitch of who you are and what's your startup.
My name is Bill Irvine, and my startup is GapGrid. And the quick explanation of what GapGrid is we're solving a really big problem. Well, it's sort of big. It's a $700 billion problem. And that's what North American companies are experiencing in losses from downtime. And to get a sense as to why it's $700 billion, and why it has grown to that level exponentially over the past decade. Data center knowledge has been tracking the cause of downtime, and equipment failure used to be the number one cause. And as this cost of downtime kept skyrocketing, in 2014, the primary cause shifted from equipment failure to human error. Mm-hmm. And in tracking the cause of that human error, it directly correlates to the rise in microservices and the API economy. And how now we're integrating enterprise to the cloud and to create things like ACV auctions. They're relying on a number of different service vendors to get their product to the market. Sure. Sometimes 15, and an enterprise like M&T Bank might use 30 or 40.
So the larger the company, the more the vendors you use.
Right, and all of these vendors have their own change management schedule for things that they're doing, for times where they might be down or they might be at risk of being down because they're making a change. And they notify me or you, the customers, by email. And we all know what's happening with email.
I don't check any of my email.
Yeah, right. We're getting swamped in a sea of emails. Well, companies have a procedure in place where a certain email address receives these notifications. But so many are coming in, and the linear typical solution of applying people to work harder, smarter on categorizing these emails so that we know what's happening when isn't solving the problem. A great example that I use is what happened to Starbucks about 2 years ago. They were planning a software update to all of their stores. You know, their registers are essentially CRM engines that keep track of everything you do. So they planned a software update at 2 a.m. Unbeknownst to the people planning the software update, Comcast was planning a service outage at 2:15 a.m. to upgrade network equipment. You know, that downtime was only going to be about 5 to 15 minutes. But and then someone at the NOC, the Network Operations Center at Starbucks, certainly got that email from Comcast, but it didn't get up the food chain to the people planning the software update at Starbucks. So what happened was, in the middle of that software update, the internet went down for those customers. The update failed. In the morning, 8,000 stores couldn't even take cash transactions because their cash registers were essentially bricks.
And of course, nobody knew that until
they got
6
to
a.m. New York City when they're trying to open up Starbucks and realize, oh crap, I can't do it.
Exactly. So that's a very clear example of the kinds of things of the kind of problem that GapGrid will solve, because we're automating the collection of those emails and turning them into a standard format for the machines to learn and process from them. Put that into a timeline so that you can see where everything is happening and when we detect that two events are happening at the same time, or even an event comes through that says, you know, there might be downtime, we send an alert to the account owner or to whoever else needs to be alerted that on this day you should take a close look and perhaps reschedule what you planned around what the other company is planning. Because sometimes all it takes is a half-hour jigger in your schedule to avoid that problem.
So how did how did you come up? How did you identify this issue? Was it part of your background in kind of the corporate world, or did you just see that news story about Starbucks and go, I wonder what could have fixed that, and then kind of dig into it that way?
Well, I was hit by this problem in my previous startup in Phoenix. It's a machine learning company. We were launching a new product, and I had a big ad campaign. Well, for me, big. I was about $80,000. So for a startup, that's a big ad campaign.
That's a lot, yeah.
The data provider for my landing pages and my landing page provider had a bit of a hiccup where they both changed their protocols, a minor change of the protocols at the same time. So for a brief period, the data wasn't getting through to my landing pages. Well, a brief period was 15 minutes. And for me, that was most of my ad spend on the East Coast. So I spent nearly $60,000 sending people to 404, page not found.
Was it at least a stylized 404 page, or was it just the blank white?
It was, yeah. They had some cute little creature on the page saying, "Oh, we're sorry."
Yeah.
So, I have had this problem, and it's a problem I've known about and had to deal with. But really, the guys at IVR Technology Group and through what they've experienced at Synacor, they've been sort of working on this as a pet project for the past year, sort of on a part-time thing.
Sure.
And not really having the capacity or really the, I don't want to say vision because they had a lot of vision, but really the ability to take what they have and extricate it from Argyle and create a new company. About a little more than 9 months ago, we started talking about that, and they thought, it's a good idea, Bill. If let's join forces. Let's bring you on as a CEO. Let's form a separate entity. And then my job since then has been to look at the kernel, this brilliant idea they've had, and flesh it out into a full product vision where 3 years from now, what kind of product will this be and what will it do? And really, as we scale and collect all these emails and all these change management events from the internal company as well, we need all their internal change events and start to see the causation of what's going on. We're going to have a huge corpus of data that relates to change management and the results of change management effects. And that's ultimately where I see the company having a big value, is applying machine learning to this, so that not only do we prevent you from having downtime because something is coming,
sure,
but we help you plan your change management events smarter, because now you have a better process in place because of the machine learning on all the previous change management events that we've applied. So we give you a better understanding. The most simple thing is, recategorizing the types of changes around what times you do it. Don't do anything major at 2 o'clock in the morning, because everybody does their major stuff at 2 o'clock in the morning. I mean, that's one of the most basic takeaways.
Yep. It's kind of like how marketing newsletters always go out on Tuesdays at 2 for some reason.
Exactly. But there's a lot more nuances that we can learn once we get a hold of all this data. And then, getting the company investor ready. Some of my background is financial modeling, and getting all the particulars that investors really need to see, and the expertise around projecting and advertising and sales and marketing, and just packaging this up as now this is something that has legs, and going out and getting the first version of the product done, which it is done. And we're now beginning to onboard some of our first pilot program customers before we really go to market, because we want to get some basic learning on how they use the tool, what integrations they need, because there may be integrations with something like Redmine or Jira on their end, so that we can automatically pull in what they're doing. And then it becomes a much more valuable integrated tool for them. And that's the next steps before we actually go to market.
So kind of in plain speak, and I always like, to always try to keep in mind the listeners. So in plain speak,
right,
your software, or your platform rather, is just kind of culling through the internal communications of a company and trying to find those trigger points of when something could be overlapping and cause a huge issue for that company, right?
Yeah, exactly. All the external and internal events that might collide, we call them a change management collisions, and let you know in an automated way what's coming that you should be worried about.
So without revealing too many internal details, because I always know people are sometimes weary of doing that. Can you explain kind of how you're able to automate something like that? Because I would imagine that's requires quite a bit of horsepower to do something like that, right?
Well, yes and no. Ultimately, yes. Right now, no. We are going to be applying natural language processing and machine learning to managing these emails, processing them, and categorizing them. And that's my background in my previous startup.
Sure.
But Right now, we're doing it ourselves. Before we can teach the machines, the humans need to know what to do.
Right.
So as we, for the next few months, everyone on the team, because I want everyone to know what's coming in and how to categorize it and take notes on what works best. Everyone is manually processing these emails and converting them to this standard format that's been put out by the ITIL as to how change management events should be structured. So we're manually doing that. So we're going to be seeing all these different emails, and they're all in a different format. There's no standard format.
Why would there be? Of course, yeah.
Yes, right, of course.
Yeah.
And it's really funny because, like Apple, some of the people out there listening might know, when we get a change management event from the Apple Store, sometimes they typically put in some kind of joke or humorous thing. Mm-hmm. So, we have to make sure the machines know what to pay attention to.
All right, yeah.
For
otherwise
each individual
disregard
vendor.
it, and now your service has caused an outage, and
that's
it's not
right.
supposed to.
Yeah, and there's one service pack from Cisco. We just found out yesterday that not only do they from the same email do they send change management alerts, but they also send notifications of parties and events that are coming around, different gatherings, meetups around the country for the product. So we have to learn to ignore those.
Otherwise,
right.
Otherwise, you've created possibly more confusion.
Exactly. So that's why we're teaching ourselves before we teach the machines. And really, the machine learning doesn't happen automatically. Right. It needs people to the machines need people to teach them.
So, if I'm correct, you're a Western New York native, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Born and raised.
Got married here. 2 kids. I left in 2000.
As I say, but then you left. You
yes.
left us.
Right, I did. Well, in 2000, there wasn't much big level career advancement here in Buffalo, especially for what I was doing at that time. Previous to leaving, I had started probably one of the first advertising technology companies in the country. This was 95, and I was soon acquired by a local ad agency. And then that agency got to a point where, a regional agency, it was Buffalo, Toronto, Cleveland, but really their growth path was only so far.
Yeah.
And I was recruited to start a digital technology department at an agency in New York City. So it made sense. I mean, that was the trajectory that kept my career in a forward path. And from there, from that, I launched a startup in online publishing. Our properties got to the peak of about 5 million monthly unique visitors before social media started to take the air out of everybody's traffic. And then when I moved to Phoenix, that's where I started the machine learning startup that got deep into a lot of big data analysis of unstructured data, which is written word. And then we were finished with that, and my wife and I are sitting again in New York City, looking at the next opportunity. I had something big that was very viable, and if all I had to say was yes, but it was a senior position at a trade group in digital. Mm-hmm. And I got to understand through meetings with them and then running some events for them that my position would be herding cats, writing papers on how it's going herding cats, and forming committees on how I could better herd cats.
How could you better herd the cats, yeah.
So I like to build things. And I mean, while the pay and the I would be prominent in the industry, my face would be around a lot, just the task didn't appeal to me. So, we're sitting wondering, what else there might be. And just one day, as wives do, my wife Julie said, "Well, what's happening back in Buffalo?" I said, "I don't know. It's been a while since I checked." And I looked, and I was shocked. I really was. I was both impressed and shocked. And my search path led me to the 43 North Next Things Now video, and we're watching that over and over again, realizing that we should come back. And Jordy's video for Z80 on how he's lamenting that all these people, all his friends and executives have left Buffalo, and wouldn't it be great if they could come back? And I came for a visit to the Bright Buffalo Niagara event last year, and talked to a few people, met a few people, and networked a bit, and thought I need to come home. And on a leap of faith, we came home. And funny story, as we were driving with it wasn't a U-Haul. Yeah, it was a U-Haul. As we were driving with the U-Haul on the thruway, and we're getting close to, okay, we can probably pick up 97 Rock now. I don't know what song was playing when we finally got 97 Rock, but the very next song was Motley Crue, Home Sweet Home. And that was, we were pounding on the roof, and it was a riot. That was sort of that emotional moment that realized this was the right choice.
You know, this is the type of thing I love to hear. I love to hear about people in their journey. And you know, a lot of people left Western New York in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and early 2000s. And when in my previous life in news, I'm sitting there kind of pounding, Buffalo's chest, saying, things are great and they're happening here. It's really refreshing to hear someone who left not probably thinking I'm ever going to go back home.
Right.
And now you're creating a startup that could potentially be an industry changer.
I hope so. We certainly hope so. We're not drinking our own Kool-Aid much, but we have high hopes and some interest from investors. They wanted to see what the product looks like now that we've completed it, and we're circling back to them. I tweeted about a week ago that we finished, what we did with our summer. We finished our product. Yeah. And that was, that got a lot of attention too. It was fun.
Fortunately, in Buffalo, there's quite a few industries kind of homegrown here as well that could probably capitalize on the service you guys are working on creating, right?
Yeah, we have a lot of interest from area ITs and enterprises.
IT's a pretty big industry. Like in Buffalo, people might not realize it's not a powerhouse, but there's quite a bit of IT industry here in Buffalo, right?
Well, yeah, and sort of the people that left Synacor like 5-6 years ago, they started that the Buffalo Breakfast Club. Mike Kenzaneri, Steve Poland, Danny Maniszewski, they almost are responsible in a big way for what happened and what grew here. Yeah. And they're in either a soft touch where some of their ideas or software are behind a lot of tech startups. They're sort of that original spark that got things going. And I've been talking to them, and that's their inspiration is also what has really made me happy that I'm back home.
Now, when you came back home, obviously GapGrid still wasn't formed yet. You're still kind of an entrepreneur without a startup, correct? Right.
Well, I was bouncing around several different startups. I was just mentoring for free. Spent a lot of time with Oscar Thimble and Rohan Interactive X, and helped out Tim Zielinski. I came on as sort of a mercenary chief operating officer to help get his company investor ready as well. He's in Silicon Valley, a Buffalo native, thinking of moving his company back to Buffalo, and spent some time there. But what happened is he lucked out where he got a very high level executive from Intuit to jump over to his company. But that guy wanted his company to stay in Silicon Valley. So great for you, Tim. But I came to Buffalo to build jobs here, not in Silicon Valley. So I'm still advising, and he's still going strong. But I wasn't not busy. I was I was pretty bouncing around with doing the mentoring thing on a few different occasions.
Well, and I've seen you out and about quite a bit at some of the networking, the 43 North stuff, and other kind of the startup scene events, networking. I mean, what was your impression? So once you kind of got your feet on the ground here, being a successful entrepreneur elsewhere in bigger cities, bigger markets, is it viable? Are things turning around? I always like to hear people's perspective who've seen success elsewhere but are now here.
Buffalo's, I've been embedded, even though I was in Phoenix. I had a deep connection to the startup culture in Silicon Valley because we were pulling talent from there. Yeah. And then also spent some time in Boston and went to major events in Dublin and then also Austin. So I got around to experience the different startup ecosystems, not all of them, but several. The thing that strikes me about Buffalo's ecosystem is it's Buffalo's ecosystem. It's a blue-collar approach at a tech ecosystem and a startup ecosystem that you don't see anywhere else. And what's different about that is everyone here is interested in helping anyone else. I mean, when you meet someone at a networking event where your interests are aligned in some way, it isn't oh well, that's interesting, thank you. It's oh wow, that's really cool, how can I help? Mm-hmm. And that doesn't exist in many other ecosystems. It might exist in similar cities like Cleveland. I'm sure we do see some similarities. But we met with a VC who's starting a venture fund, and he's specifically looking at smaller ecosystems like Buffalo and others. He met with us because after Bright Buffalo, he landed on Buffalo as an ecosystem he wants to focus on, because he sees investing in very early stage startups as being lower risk here than anywhere else.
Sure.
Because that ecosystem is so it's so ingrained in the culture of how can I help, and those were his exact words. And to him, from an investment standpoint, from an outside investor, someone who never ever invested money in a Buffalo tech company or startup before, that's how he sees the Buffalo ecosystem. And we need to really nurture that little aha moment that he had and capitalize on it.
Where do you think our successes will come from here in Buffalo? Not necessarily a specific company, but the types of companies.
Well, clearly we have a strong play in life sciences, and that's evident by what's happening here on the medical campus and some of the startups that we're seeing coming. But that's a long play.
Yeah.
Life sciences could take 10 years to fully play out into something because of just that's the nature of the beast. Well, when you look at ACV auctions, in just 2 years, they've went from a few customers to now they're taking over the East Coast. And now we're starting to see competition, which is great. There's a company, the name escapes me, that is a Y Combinator company on the West Coast that's doing the same thing. Now, I don't see that as a risk. I see that as validation that this is real. This style, this method is real, and other companies are now emulating what ACV is doing. So that's great. So I see ACV as the sort of like the banner carrier for how this blue-collar approach to a tech startup can really result in something fantastic.
Jumping back to GapGrid, does GapGrid are there other players in the same market trying to do the same thing you guys are doing?
Oddly, no.
Really?
Yes, and that's sort of the so we
good. Should publish this podcast.
That's sort of the grand and difficult part of it. The grand part is we'll have an opportunity to be first mover that shapes the market and educates the customer on how how our solution can solve their problems. But then I tell people the hardest part about being a startup with no marketplace competition is being a startup with no marketplace competition.
Right.
Because we're not able to say we're Y, we're like X, but we're Y. So there does need to be some education there. Fortunately, as we talk to CIOs and CTOs and people in charge of enterprises, there's no friction. As soon as they learn what we do, it's not how much do you cost. It's when can you start.
Mm-hmm. That was kind of my next question. Are they currently? What's the manpower being spent internally in some of these big companies to combat the issue you guys are trying to do? I mean, is it a big resource that's being spent trying to finagle those waters?
Yeah, typically companies will have change control department, and these are the people that get these emails, and they try to determine who needs to know, and usually because they're so busy, because that's not all they're doing is processing emails. They're making sure internal events happen as planned.
Sure.
Usually everything goes into a shared calendar, and they rely on whoever needs to know to be looking at the shared calendar. And as you know, that doesn't happen. We get so busy, right? We get so busy just trying to solve the problems we have right now that it needs more than just a task list on your daily to-do to go look at what could be happening 2 weeks from now. And that's typically the time frame when these email notifications come in. They're always 2 weeks ahead. And then you get a reminder email the day before and a notification that the change is happening now.
So I think for the first time on the podcast, we might have the first, big $1 billion idea. So if people want to, what's next for GapGrid? Obviously, like you said earlier, you finished the product, so to speak. It's available on store shelves. I imagine it's a nice little compact disc.
Yeah, right. Yeah, sure.
CD-ROM. So what's next? What's the fall outlook and moving onward?
Next is that 2 to 3 month of carefully working with our development partners, our pilot program customers, to make sure that we have a finely tuned product that's going to be useful on a day-to-day basis for these enterprises. And then also working, some of those also include smaller companies who are development companies who might be doing multiple projects for multiple customers. One of those is IVR Technology Group, as an example, who's sort of related to us. Akash is one of our advisors who really, he really believes in the product. For them, it's a much smaller problem that still could be very expensive because they don't get too many. They might get 10 or 12 of these notifications a week. So it's not something that's top of mind. So for someone who doesn't have, for a smaller company who might be doing solutions for several different customers, they don't have a person assigned to this. It just might be their IT guy. So for them, automating this problem is actually somewhat bigger than for big companies who already have people in change control, because it could prevent a very expensive problem for one of their most important customers. And so in that case, the scale of the problem is different because it could be life altering for their company. Yeah. Where for M&T, it could be $1 million annoyance. So it works for a broad range of different kinds of companies. But so what's next is, it's making sure that we've refined the product, then going to market. We have a plan to a number of events we're going to go to showcase the product, get advertising out in the field. I have David Lynch, who's my director of operations and sales. He's got deep enterprise sales experience, and he's just chomping at the bit to start going hitting the street with what we've got, and getting it to the point where we now have a really solid product. And then what's next? There's additional versions of the product as it matures over time, additional services, additional components that broaden what we do, like that machine learning that I mentioned. And ultimately, if all goes well, about 2.5 years from now, we're going to be that company that can predict how all these different, the collection of services, if you will, the Internet of Things, if it's going to be slow or fast or slow down or even be a real problem on any given day because of the amount of data we've collected, and we can extrapolate as to the performance of things. But getting us from here to there, obviously it needs some money.
That was my next question. So is GapGrid actively seeking investment, and how do folks?
Yeah, we have a number in mind for sort of our seed round to get us to the point where, from we've finished our pilot program, we're now onboarding customers, prove that we can scale, and then go for the A round from there.
And for the listeners at home, Bill's now sliding a piece of paper across the desk with that number on it. So actively seeking out a seed round and
yes,
stays.
And we have some people on the hook that are interested. And one of them is that out of town investor who saw us at Bright Buffalo and wanted to follow up.
If people want to learn more, get in touch with you and help, as you said earlier, how can they get a hold of you?
We don't need any help. That's
okay.
Yeah.
He's doing it himself, folks.
Go to GapGrid.com, and from there you can click through to the pilot program page that'll give you a little bit more information. That's soon to be updated. That information there is about 4 months old, and everything moves fast in a tech startup. So when I say it's 4 months old, the average person was like, it's just 4 months old. To us, 4 months is an eternity. Yeah, we've learned a lot since then, and that's about to be updated.
Well, Bill, thank you for joining us on the podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Of course, it was a pleasure.
Nate, you're the man.
I try. We'll keep in touch, and hopefully this time next year we're connecting with you again, and even bigger things are happening for GapGrid.
I really hope so.
Talk to you soon.
All right, thank you.
I want to thank Bill for joining me on the podcast this week. If you want to learn more about GapGrid, visit GapGrid.com. And just a reminder, the 43 North Finals live at Chase tickets are now available on our website, 43north.org, and the capacity and the room is filling up quickly. 3,000 seats, folks. That's going to fill up. We know it's going to fill up, so we want you to get your free tickets now. Head on over to 43north.org. Thanks again for listening to the podcast. I'm Nate Benson, and we'll see you at the next one.